Good evening, everybody. My name is Matthew.
And I'm Anthony. And today we'll be making our case for the effectiveness of inquiry-based instruction. We will begin by first telling you the steps involved in effectively using inquiry-based education. We will then walk you through an example of a lesson which utilizes inquiry as its catalyst for learning. And we'll end by showing you an example of a completed inquiry-based assignment.
Starts off with the aforementioned steps to effectively utilize inquiry in the classroom, as well as providing a brief example of how one might use inquiry in a social studies setting.
I will be telling you why you should consider utilizing inquiry-based instruction with your students and providing an example of a finished assignment made using inquiry.
I'll get us started with the four basic components of the inquiry process. These four components include immersion, which is the initial introduction to the material and the stage in which curiosity is built. So this is the stage in which you provide your students with relevant resources such as videos, books, other things like that, just to get them interest, get their curiosity piqued and all that. From there, you, along with your students, begin to develop essential questions which both cover the subject material and prove to be relevant to your students. The third and most important part of immersion is keeping your students engaged by encouraging their questions, showing that you value their responses, and building upon their reactions to new learning. From there, we move on to investigation, which is where the body of the work and inquiry begins. At this stage, students begin to compile their sources, begin to evaluate them based on how relevant they are, how effective they are at answering their questions, what sorts of sources they are, if they're credible, things like that. And you at this stage too can help your students by sort of modeling ways in which you can determine the validity of a source. Moving on from there, we get to coalescence. Coalescence is the stage in which research is compiled and evaluated to find facts which help students answer their questions. At this stage, you intensify your research by evaluating all your sources, going through and sort of compiling them into easier to read chunks by annotating, summarizing, whatever you'd like to do. You tie it all together by synthesizing the information into a concise, concrete answer to your question. And then once you've done that, you are ready for the fourth and final step, which is making it public. So at this point, you and your students can make the research known by putting it out there in the form of, say, an artistic piece, in the form of a short film, through a podcast, a presentation, an essay, any medium you'd like. And I'll let Anthony take it.
Now that you know how, let's find out. Inquiry is a student-centered approach. As research shows, this student-centered approaches are more effective in order for students to retain the information that they are taught by us as teachers. It necessitates and encourages curiosity in students. As we know from our time as students, we know that when we are curious in what is being taught, we are more prone to retain the knowledge and keep this information after the class ends. And it's valuable in developing research abilities. These abilities will be valuable not only in this specific class or in this specific subject, but in other classes and in other subjects. When we move on to high school, it'll be valuable in those classes. In college, it'll be valuable. And not just in terms of an education system, this will be valuable when we're looking for a job further on in life. And these research abilities are something that will be invaluable for the student to learn for their whole life.
And now that you know the how and the why, let's see what it looks like in practice. We'll be using 8th grade social studies TEKS in our example, which will have our students focus on the causes and effects of the Mexican-American War and how the war impacted the United States as a whole. Let's see what we can do. So we begin with immersing our students in the subject. This can occur in any way you see fit, but for our purposes, we have chosen a brief 13-minute PBS video called History in a Nutshell, the Mexican-American War, which will provide students a well-rounded overview of the lead up to, events of, and end of the war. Prior to the viewing, students will be provided anticipation guides like the one you see in the bottom left, which include statements and questions such as, all Americans supported the war with Mexico, and Did Texas's revolution and annexation into the United States play a part in starting the war? Students will keep these questions in mind as they watch and will write down any additional questions raised as part of the video. Time following the video to ask said questions, which will form the beginning of our inquiry-based lesson and our assignment. Students will then be encouraged to begin researching their questions, or hitting the books, so to say. Students may use textbooks, videos, documents, or any other credible sources to search for answers to their questions. For example, the PBS video begins with a quote from future President Ulysses S. Grant sharing his disapproval of the Mexican-American War in the 1870s, which can be used to answer, or rather respond to, the statement, "All Americans supported war with Mexico." Be sure that you yourself are modeling how to find credible, valuable sources. Students can begin to answer questions using the question-answer relationship strategy, which helps students understand what sorts of questions they're looking to answer and how the answers to these questions can be used to inform bigger picture questions. Finally, students can begin to compile or coalesce their knowledge. Students will be encouraged to, alongside teacher modeling, review their sources and annotate important points, create summaries of important sections, and utilize a variety of literary skills to condense their research into smaller, easier to reference bits of information, which will be helpful in completing the fourth step, making that knowledge public. At this stage, students will present the information they have gathered, which can either be in a format approved by you, the teacher, or in any way they feel comfortable, such as in the form of a short film, a PowerPoint, an artistic piece, a podcast, or other similar presentation methods. Once they have done this, you can use the anticipation guides from before so that students can better analyze where they started, where they've come, and if, based on the questions that they started with, they have any more questions now that they've done additional research. With that, I'll hand you over to Anthony to provide you an example of a completed inquiry-based assignment.
Inquiry-based assignment will be based on the TEK that we have previously chosen. It is Social Studies, 8th grade, History. The student understands westward expansion and its effect on the political, economic, and social development of the nation. The student is expected to explain the causes and effects of the U.S.-Mexican War and their impact on the United States, and it focuses on the ELA strands of inquiry and research, listening, speaking, reading, writing, and thinking using multiple texts. The student engages in both short-term and sustained recursive inquiry, processes for a variety of purposes. The student is expected to critique the research process at each step and implement changes as needs occur and are identified. C, develop and revise a plan. E, locate relevant sources. And F, synthesize information from a variety of sources. The method that we've chosen to use is called a letter person. I find this method to be more curiosity driven in terms of the students enjoy doing this. They're curious as to see as how these people would have written letters or how political process would have been done back then 200 years ago. And it's a lot more entertaining for the students than just having them write a 500-word research paper. In this method, the students are to write a letter to an important person at that particular point in history as it pertains to your specific class. They are required to organize information from a variety of sources and form from it a letter representative of feelings and ideas at the time. They must use various facts and statistics from the time and, using grade appropriate writing, form a letter. A specific sample for the TEK that we have chosen, the students are to use a variety of sources obtained from online, the library, or previous class lectures to write a letter to President Polk detailing why the war with Mexico must be immediately stopped, or they must praise the war effort. In either case, they must use effects from the war to build their letter to Polk. An example against the war would be, over 10,000 souls have needlessly died in the war already. An example 4 would be, we have since had much security and peace since the Mexican bandits have been pushed south by the U.S. Army. Here's 2 finished examples of what letters could look like that students wrote using this inquiry process. Here is a letter in support of the war. Dear President Polk, I write to express my fervent support for the Mexican-American War. This conflict is a vital opportunity for our great nation to expand its borders and secure prosperity. Recent surveys showcase the economic benefits and job creation stemming from wartime industries, the potential acquisition of new territories with names like California and Texas, promises of increased resources and influence. Furthermore, rumors abound of untapped gold mines in these lands, fueling dreams of unparalleled wealth and economic growth. This war is a strategic move to strengthen a nation standing on the global stage. I give you an unwavering support of this decisive and historic endeavor, and may the destiny of this country manifest itself through the war. Sincerely, Howard Lucas James Howitzer III.
And an example of a letter against the war. Dear President Polk, I, a humble frontiersman, beseech you to halt the Mexican-American War. The toll on the impoverished is unbearable, and the conflict diverts resources from those struggling on the fringes of society. The numbers of dead have already amassed 10,000 souls. The prospect of territorial gain pales in comparison to the human cost. Let us instead engage in dialogue, seeking peaceful solutions that honor our shared humanity. War need not be the legacy we bequeath to further generations. Spare the lives of our brothers, alleviate the suffering of the destitute, and let diplomacy prevail in shaping the destiny of our nation. Respectfully, Chester T. Young.
And with that, our presentation is over. We will now be open for questions that we would gladly like to answer.
God almighty. We have a lot to edit now.